Good evening, members, officers, members of the public, anyone watching on Zoom or YouTube to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Have we had any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Kevin Thompson and he's substituted by Councillor David Whitcroft.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. These have been circulated. Does anybody have any questions or comments? No? Thank you. Item 3. Declarations of interest. Does any member have a yes? Is this all the same yes? Related to application number 7? No, that's 6.
Oh, no, 6, no,
Oh, right, please.
I had an email from the, I'm guessing it's the agent, on the application for Watchmoor Park, but I've obviously still come with an open mind.
Councillor Glout? Same?
And I had a phone call as well.
Yes, me too. Councillor Noble?
I had a phone call, I didn't see an email.
Councillor Omani? Councillor Rowlands?
I did a physical visit, so I'm really implicated.
Councillor Wilson?
I had that email. I also have a declaration of interest in application number, item number 4. I've received correspondence from residents objecting to it. And item number 7, I'm a member of the British Airline Pilots Association, which campaigns for more civil aviation, but not in this specific case. And I have an open mind on all applications.
Thank you. Councillor White?
Same as everybody else, but I had a phone call as well.
Okay. Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you, Chair. So phone call and email on item number 6 and a lot of contact and contact with residents on item number 4, but again, come to the meeting with an open mind.
Okay. Councillor Helen Whitcroft?
Yeah, the Watchmoor Park, telephone and email.
Thank you. Councillor David Whitcroft?
Watchmoor, just an email.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. First application. Item number 4, application number 230486, Woodlands Lane, Windlesham. Neville.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal relates to the redevelopment. It's a bit too loud. The proposal relates to the redevelopment of the site for 7 dwellings. The application has been called in on the grounds that it does not adhere to the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, as well as concerns regarding the loss of trees, the ecological impact, and the overdevelopment of the site. There is an update to report on this item. A further 2 additional consultee responses have been provided, one from the Council's Environmental Health Officer, raising no objections, subject to a condition for a noise insulation scheme, and confirming that there is no objection on air quality grounds. Another consultee response has been provided from Surrey County Council, raising no objection to the removal of the tree on highway land fronting the site, subject to a caveat assessment being carried out and payment in lieu for the removal. This caveat assessment would be secured as part of the legal agreement. In addition, there is an additional paragraph, section 7.3 of the report. Policy CP3 of the local plan provides an indication of how housing development would be distributed at the time of adoption. However, the policy does not set out a maximum number of units in any given location. Since the adoption of the local plan, the council's housing need has increased from 191 units per annum to 321 units per annum, a 68% increase. Policy CP3 therefore does not reflect the current housing need. There is also an amendment to Condition 5, which includes the requirement for hedge planting to be provided as part of the soft landscaping condition. The site measures approximately 0.4 hectares in size and is situated on the northern side of Woodlands Lane, Windlesham, comprising a single-family dwelling house. To the north and west of the site is Heath Park Wood, whilst to the east is St Margaret's, a site also comprising a single dwelling. The site falls within the countryside beyond the greenbelt, whilst trees on the site are protected by TPOs. The site also forms part of a wider allocated housing reserve site, which is represented by the shaded area on this image. 2 other applications adjacent to the site are currently being considered by the council, with these sites outlined in yellow on the image. These photos show the context of the site from Woodlands Lane. The site is bounded by a solid timber board fencing and benefits from 2 existing vehicle access points into the site, circled in red. These show views within the site. As we can see, the majority of the trees are contained towards the boundaries. The proposal seeks the construction of 7 units. The existing 2 access points would be retained, with the main access into the site widened to allow for cars to safely pass, as well as a pedestrian footpath running into the site to be installed. 3 trees, including the tree forward of the main access, would need to be removed to facilitate the highway improvements. The removal of these trees has been agreed from the council's arboricultural officer. Given their low quality, whilst the removal of the tree outside of the application site has been agreed by Surrey County Council, subject to the caveat assessment and payment in lieu to be secured by the Section 106 legal agreement. Each property would meet the relevant internal and external space standards, whilst 3 parking spaces are provided to each unit. Relative to the existing neighbouring property at St Margaret's, owing to the separation distances, there would be no undue amenity harm arising from the development. When considering the proposed development at the neighbouring site, owing to the orientation relationship between the properties, together with the separation distances, there would also be no amenity harm arising. Plot 1 would face towards Woodlands Lane, utilising the secondary access point. The existing solid board fencing to the front would be replaced with post and rail fencing, whilst additional planting is proposed behind the fencing to help maintain the verdant character of Woodlands Lane, with this planting secured by Condition 5. The property would be set behind the mature trees that front the road, all of which to this part would be retained. The properties have a common architectural theme, with the use of red and brown bricks, tarred roofs, hip features and brick detailing. The proposed design of the properties is considered to be of a high quality and is supported by the council's urban design consultant. The application relates to the redevelopment of a site that forms part of a wider allocated housing reserve site, as well as being identified within the council's strategic land availability assessment as a deliverable site within the 5-year plan period, forming part of the council's 5-year housing land supply. There is therefore an assumption of increased residential redevelopment on this site. Where policy CP3 of the local plan refers to net additional dwellings to be required across the borough, including Windlesham, this is an indicative figure and states a general distribution. When the local plan was adopted, the council housing need was at 191 units per annum. This has since risen to 321 units per annum, representing a 68% increase. As a result, policy CP3 cannot be considered in isolation and needs to be considered against the latest housing needs assessment. The site is situated in a sustainable location, resulting in the development of a brownfield site identified for housing development and would contribute towards the council's housing stock. It would therefore be considered acceptable in principle. The proposed layout and design of the scheme is also considered acceptable, whilst tree loss on the site would be largely limited to low quality trees, which the council's arboricultural officer raises no objections on. No objections have been raised on drainage, highway or ecological grounds, whilst the scheme is also considered acceptable from a noise and air quality perspective. Officers consider that the planning benefits weigh in favour of the proposal and is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions and the legal agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 public speakers on this item. The first is on Zoom, and the other 2 are in the room. Could I ask Ms. Anne Fenton?
Yep, I'm unmuted. Hello,
Okay.
Good evening.
Hello. You have 4 minutes?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, yes, and
Yes.
there'll be a bell at 3.
Yeah, I've got my own timer as well. There's
Okay.
just one thing I want to say. It's not disrespectful to the Planning Application Committee people, but I will refer to PAC meeting rather than the full word, just to save some seconds. And
Okay.
the same with Heath Park Wood. I shall say HPW in places.
Okay.
It's just to save time.
Your time starts when your presentation starts.
Thank you. Sorry. So we strongly believe that this application should not be taken in isolation. We are advised that this approach is technically illegal, as the cumulative impact of a proposed development together with the impact of an approved neighbouring development is a material planning consideration. In many of the consultation responses, the case officer ignores the Heath Park Wood development, yet the council has confirmed the Section 106 agreement for this development has been agreed. And at the PAC meeting in February 2022, discussing the reserved matters for Heath Park Wood, the case officer said that residential dwelling in that area is approved. Therefore, it is incorrect and disingenuous to claim that no decision has been made on adjacent applications and to ignore the 116 planned houses when referring to housing land supply. Excuse me, a bit croaky. This application is part of a piecemeal attack on a housing reserve site created under policy H8 of the current and former local plans. The application postdates the council's claim of adequate housing land supply, land which has since been confirmed as sufficient at 7.41 years. The case officer's argument that this development is needed to contribute to the housing land supply is therefore questionable. In 7.34, the case officer agrees that the village is already providing well in excess of the 20 dwellings required from Windlesham. The Heath Park Wood development was allowed at appeal primarily on the basis of the council's inability to demonstrate adequate housing supply for the local plan period. As this is no longer the case, and as policy H8 remains extant under the current local plan, there is no longer a need to release further policy H8 land at this location. The claim that the application site is included within the council's strategic land availability assessment does not detract from the principle of holding the H8 site in reserve and not to be developed further until all other options have been exhausted. The assessment was in any case compiled as a support document to the now withdrawn draft local plan. The presumption is supported by borough-wide policies to concentrate housing development in the west of the borough and local policies expounded in the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, which this application and the now defunct draft local plan clearly ignores. The entire reserve site was once described by the council as one of the worst options for housing development in the borough. The case officer in 7.66 agrees with this finding and states the site would not be considered to be a highly sustainable site. We really would expect sustainability to be much higher on this council's priorities. We challenge the description of the current Ferns as a brownfield site, which is not in the spirit of brownfield site definitions. It is not a redundant plot in need of redevelopment. It is a pleasant country house in its own grounds. And furthermore, it does not appear on the council's brownfield register. The development removes numerous trees that provide a noise and pollution barrier to the M3, In the biodiversity response 6.2, no response is given regarding the removal of the noise and pollution mitigation, which trees of any quality provide, and the arboricultural officer should consider this important aspect. This application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, does anyone have any questions for Ms Fenton of the planning nature? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Second speaker, Mr Murphy. Sorry, Mr Murphy, could you use this one? You'll be on telly then.
Mr. Chairman, first I must make you aware of the fact that whilst I have checked the loop system that is operating, it unfortunately is not operating with my hearing aid this evening. So It doesn't prevent me speaking, of course, but it does prevent me hearing. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Did you get that?
Yes, okay. Thank you. You will have 4 minutes. 4 minutes. After 3, there will be a...
Thank you for the hand gestures.
It's okay. Time starts when you are ready.
Okay. Under NPPF, planning systems must be plan-led, succinct, with local plans up to date by review at least once every 5 years. Since 2017, SHBC have been developing a new plan which will test all supporting data. The adoption date is as yet unknown, but we have the democratically delivered 2000 plan, the 2012 core strategy and the 2019 Windlesham neighbourhood plan, now part of the legally binding development plan. A modest level of growth, 1 to 2%, is the central thread running through these plans. But what we're seeing is improper tolerance of extreme levels of unplanned growth at around 23% direct, with impactful development in surrounding areas. SHBC is using its own shortcomings, failing its obligations to maintain an up-to-date plan, by referring to data which suggest use to advantage of the updating they failed to deliver. Without exercising the controlling influence of a plan, we're seeing speculative applications fed by market considerations and fueled by suggestions in the draft local plan. Pending the plan adoption, any data produced, including drafts, will not have the validity of being tested by the process and must not be part of considering a development proposal. The proposal before us is not plan-led and is asking for consideration in isolation on the basis of suggestions in the draft plan, not recognising its impact on the surrounding context. Policy H8 for the Windlesham Reserve site is the Heath Parkwood entity of a Persimmon-controlled area, but also the other attached sections running alongside Woodlands Lane, almost to the motorway bridge. Decisions on housing in the Persimmon-controlled area made in the 2017 public inquiry necessarily included mitigation utilising those attached sections irrespective of ownership. The Windlesham Society objection to this proposal included comment on the cumulative effect in the context by Anne Brummer, CEO of Save Me Trust, in partnership with Persimmon for wildlife concerns. I quote, "This development doesn't take into account the wildlife in any meaningful way. There is a buffer zone on the adjacent Persimmon site, and this development will render the mitigation ineffective. It should not be possible to consider two developments next door to each other in isolation that clearly impact on wildlife. This will sign the death warrant on the wildlife we've been protecting for the last few years. We would want to see a comprehensive, proven, realistic and effective mitigation for all the wildlife that lives there before any application could be considered by any official body," unquote. The inspector's decision was based on SHBC's inability to demonstrate they had the claimed housing numbers. Being mandated to go with the numbers argument, he allowed the development despite, in his own words, quote, "the harm caused," unquote. This concern led to the absolute need for mitigation underpinning that development, utilising the whole H8 entity. This unplanned proposal must not be allowed as it is in defiance of and detrimental to the legitimate democratic plan-led process. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, anybody have a question for Mr. Murphy of a planning nature? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker. Thank you. You will have 4 minutes. You'll get a warning after 3, and the time starts when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Katie Walker, an Associate Director at ET Planning, and I'm the agent on behalf of the applicant. First of all, thank you to the case officer for his report and presentation and for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. You've heard the planning merits of the proposal from the case officer, so I won't repeat them all now. However, the point is that the site forms part of the council's housing land supply. It's crucial to remember that the site is allocated for housing in the council's local plan, and this needs to form a strong material consideration in the council's decision on this application. This allocated site does comprise brownfield land, which includes residential dwellings and its curtilage, and this means that developing the site for housing removes the need to encroach on open countryside elsewhere. It is close to the amenities of the settlement of Windlesham, which means that it is a sustainable development. As it is an allocated site, it's already been subject to the relevant planning assessments in terms of the principle of developing it for housing, and has been deemed by the council as appropriate and acceptable for the provision of housing. It's also available and deliverable, so represents a real and achievable contribution for housing in the borough. The case officer has explained the current housing need position and the status of the relevant policies, including they cannot be given full weight under paragraph 11 of the NPPF. The applicant has undertaken pre-application advice with the council, a process which began 2 years ago and has addressed the council's aspirations for the site. For context, the applicant has lived in Windlesham for her whole life and has owned the subject property since 1994. She therefore has a genuine interest in the parish, wishing to retain its character. The development seeks a relatively low-density development which maintains the wooded character of this part of Windlesham, her home parish. She has also sought to provide family homes with the aim of providing houses for families with children, including 3-bedroom houses directly complying with the aspirations of the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan. The proposal has been sensitively designed to respond to the site's context, keeping the presence of a house on the street frontage in line with the current street scene of Woodlands Lane. The proposal will use the existing access points, with no additional accesses proposed, which will also mean that the impact from Woodlands Lane will be minimal. The houses themselves are 2-storey and each benefit from a generous private garden and parking to the council's standards and fit comfortably on the site, which confirms that the number of dwellings is appropriate for the site. The development retains as much tree cover and includes as much soft landscaping as possible to ensure that the character is maintained and enhanced. Transport information has been provided which demonstrates that the development would be acceptable in terms of its impact on the road network, and Surrey County Council, as you've heard, has raised no objections. Similarly, following reports from a qualified ecologist, no objection has been raised from Surrey Wildlife Trust. A significant number of signatures have been submitted in support of the proposal following community engagement undertaken by the applicant, further demonstrating their desire to do right by the local community.
1 minute left.
In summary, the proposal represents a sensitively designed development on a sustainable site that has already been allocated and therefore deemed acceptable for housing by the council. The proposed houses will provide homes for families close to the services and facilities in Windlesham, and all technical requirements have been met. The development is supported by your tree officers, by Surrey County Council Highways, by Surrey Wildlife Trust, and is supported by the case officer, as well as being supported by many members of the local community. On behalf of the applicant, I therefore respectfully request that the officer's recommendation is followed and that the application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Members? You have a question of a planning nature. Please, Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to the committee tonight to talk. Could you tell me, please, what the density is of the surrounding properties in that road?
Off the top of my head, I can't, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I'm sure we can pull up either an aerial shot or they can come back to it. It's just that you referred to it saying that it was low density and in keeping. That was all. And can you tell me, please, what size your garages are and your parking spaces are?
They're in line with the council's standards. Off the top of my head, I don't know what that is, but they are in line with the council's standards.
So if Mr. Raymond, if you can just be aware of the fact that I'm going to want that detail from us, and I'm assuming that if we've determined this application, we have that detail to hand in order to be accurately able to determine it. Could you also tell me, please, what you deem to be a reasonable bus service, because you're talking about the site being sustainable and in a sustainable location?
So in terms of sustainable location, it's edge of settlement in Windlesham. So that's how, in planning terms, we'd look at that. So it's, I believe, about 700 metres from the centre of Windlesham.
It's just over 800 metres to the nearest bus stop, which is more than twice the distance that you would expect, for example, to be a bus between a bus stop in London. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Walker, for your presentation. Would you describe any of these houses as affordable?
No, not in terms of affordable housing in the way that you mean under planning terms, no, and that requirement doesn't come into a site of this size.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. Members, you've heard the proposal from the officer. You've heard the public speakers. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Wilson.
Can I ask the officers to expand a bit more on it's page 10, the relevant planning history? So it says that the 3.5, it says that an outline planning application for 140 dwellings was approved in 2017. That's right next to this site. But it hasn't been built yet. And I know it's now current council policy to only allow 1 year from approval to start of construction. So can the officers also explain why that hasn't started yet? And does this mean that there is sang space being held up for 140 properties somewhere in the borough that's preventing other properties being built? Have I understood that correctly?
Councillor Wilson, so I think you're referring to 3.6, is that correct, on the papers, page 10?
Right, but the one above it says it was approved, the outline planning permission was approved in 3.5 in 2017, and then the reserve matters came back after that, yeah.
Yeah, so in 2017 that was allowed at appeal, and then in 2022 there was a subsequent application for an outline application which was presented to members. That was actually approved. There's been obviously ongoing negotiations on a legal agreement, hence why there's been a delay in terms of issuing that decision. That's the reason why there's been a delay on that part of that thing. So technically the decision hasn't been granted yet because it's still ongoing negotiations on the agreement.
Right, and it would be a material factor in this decision on this application if it was granted?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. I've got a number of points that I'd like to bring up. First and foremost, if we could refer to the matters that were raised by one of the public speakers around this area being part of the mitigation for the Heath Park Woods development and how we've considered that. My second question is, could you please give me the dimensions of the garages and the car parking spaces and the entrance dimension for the garages on the site? And could you also please give me the density in the surrounding areas? The reason that I'm asking for these specifically is because within the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, these are very clearly identified as minimum space standards. And we have, I'm sure that all members are aware, that when we are considering planning applications, the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan is part of that consideration and has to be considered. So in particular, I would like to refer us in addition to Windlesham Policies 2.1, which is where we are to respond positively and to protect the built and individual character features of the setting and maintain the established density of residential dwellings and units. So I'm wanting to make sure that we're maintaining this if we go ahead and approve this application. I'm wanting to make sure that you have the details for me of the sizes of the parking spaces, the garaging and the entrance to those garages, and that they adhere to the neighbourhood plan. I'd also like you to come back on the points that were made by Mr Murphy about this being part mitigation for the Heath Park Wood site. And in addition to that, I would like to ask how in this case, it's been identified as a brownfield site when, as one of the other speakers actually raised, in the 2022 list held on the borough website pertaining to brownfield sites, it's not identified on that site. If you could come back on those points first, please, and then I've got possibly something else I'd like to come back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. In terms of the site being used for mitigation for the Heath Park Wood site, I don't believe it was. I think the site opposite the site is what's used as a mitigation for the Heath Park Wood site. Regarding the dimensions of the garages and the parking spaces, we do not have that at hand. However, Surrey County Council has reviewed the application and raised no objection in respect of the size or dimensions of the garages and the spaces. Turning to the brownfield description of the site is previously developed land comprising of an existing dwelling. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily need to be on the brownfield register to be considered previously developed land or a brownfield site.
Sorry, there's also the matter of density in the surrounding area. So from what we're saying at the moment is that we have determined this application without being assured that the space standards that are very clearly identified in the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan have been met.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the spaces and the garage spaces were considered as part of the application. However, I don't have the figures at hand. Turning to the density question as well, I don't have those figures, unfortunately, for you.
Might I suggest in that case that we can adjourn this application without hearing it, because without the reassurance of that, I am very concerned that we are not determining this plan in line with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan.
Mr Chilling.
So I've just looked at the planning statement, which was submitted as part of the application. 5.17 on the actual density and size of dwellings is 22 hectares per 22 dwellings per hectare is the sort of density on the site. It may not be in keeping with the area, but you cannot take that in isolation in terms of the overall sort of site context, and also in terms of the design, the actual layout of the buildings as well, and also the car parking as well. You need to take it as a whole in terms of the quality of the actual scheme itself. So from my perspective, I think what's put forward in front of members tonight is basically a scheme which obviously is a higher density, I accept that, but also you've got to have a look at the design, the quality of the scheme, the layout of the buildings, the gardens being provided, the parking layout. We've got obviously an objection from Surrey County Council in terms of the size of the parking spaces and also the size of the garages. They've accepted the actual parking ratio to be acceptable. So overall, I think the development is acceptable and is in accordance with the core strategy as well. So that needs to be taken into consideration as a material factor.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point and then a question. So it was mentioned that 28 people support this locally, and it says in section 6.1 that a petition with 28 signatures of support has been received with no supporting comments. However, there is a petition running regarding this area, regarding the whole of Heath Park Woods, which has got 1,142 signatures of local people to protect the trees, including in this area. And people have gone out and tied yellow ribbons around the trees and things like that. And 1,100 signatures out of the population of Windlesham is a very large proportion of the population who want to protect all the trees in this area. My question is not on that, it's on, there's some mentions of out-of-date figures in the neighbourhood plan, which is 2019, so it's only 5 years old, not as out of date as some things. And there was a provision for an extra 20 dwellings in Windlesham, and as Mr. Raymond said, this has increased, the overall requirement has increased by 68% since then. So 68% of 20 is about 13, I think, so that would make about 33 dwellings then required in Windlesham, and over 140 have already been approved. So, and it is our policy to concentrate development of residential development in the west of the borough, so not in this area. So doesn't that have an effect on, a material effect on making this decision as well? And what constitutes an out-of-date neighbourhood plan, and who is responsible for updating it? Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Just in terms of that WMP policy 1.1, so that's based on policy CP3, which sets out the net new dwellings will generally be distributed in the manner set out in the table in CP3. It doesn't set out a maximum for any given area, and given the site has already been identified not only as a housing reserve site, but also forming part of the council's 5-year land housing supply, residential development uplift on this site is expected. The total number of net units completed in Windlesham since the adoption of the local plan is 47 units. This is comparatively lower to other areas which had similar indicative figures. The West End, for example, had the same indicative figure, however has had 386 net units delivered over the plan period. Even accounting for the other applications adjacent to the site and the Heath Park Wood development, the total number of dwellings would still fall below that of the West End, for example. The supporting text of policy WMP 1.1 also sets out a growth figure of 1 to 2%, taking into account all the applications and the Heath Park Wood development. This would be similar to the total number of completions in Bisley and Mitchett, which were also identified to have a 2%, to provide 2% of the housing need.
Can I take Councillor Garrett and Councillor
Sorry,
Reid?
can I come back on the second part of my question about what constitutes an out-of-date neighbourhood plan?
Sure.
And who should update it? Thank you.
In terms of the date of it, I mean, you know, the policy needs to be considered in conjunction with the latest housing needs assessment. At the time of adoption, it was only considered at that point. So the housing need assessment is updated throughout the plan period and will support the draft local plan. So the policy needs to be considered against that evidence base.
And the sort of upshot of that is that although 20 dwellings were envisaged at the time for Windlesham, there is really no upper limit. It could be 500, and that would be in line with West End and other places.
It sets out an indicative and general figure. You know, with the council's housing need having shot up by 68%, there is a need ultimately across the borough to increase our housing stock.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. Comment and then question. I don't think we can consider a petition that isn't closed yet. From what I understand, we were discussing in the chamber only last night. The question is relating to Councillor Wheeler's question. I don't know the Windlesham plan obviously as well as you do, but listening to the conversation, appear the question that was raised was relating to the size, relating to the Windlesham plan. And the answer we got was, counties say it's acceptable, but our county working back to the Windlesham plan? Because if they're not, it doesn't matter if they find it acceptable, it's not acceptable by the Windlesham plan. So I'd like a clarification on that point if possible. Thank you.
And if I can just come on that, the Windlesham Made plan is very clear on sizing, which was based on the assessment that they did, and the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan has been adopted, and this very argument about the sizing of parking spaces, I believe, was a matter that was under consideration with Matthew's Corner, and when that went to appeal, it was upheld. So I think it's fairly evident I'm not going to be supporting this application, and I would urge all members in this chamber to support what is local democracy, and the neighbourhood plan has been adopted by this council and should be considered. And I have not had any assurances this evening that we are in line with those parking sizes and with Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan 2.1, which is around density and established density within an area.
Want to come back on that?
Just in terms of the surrounding issue around the parking spaces, we turn to page 36 of the committee report, which references the Surrey County Highways response. They state the proposed parking arrangements for all of the other plots would conform to both the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan and to the Surrey County Council parking standards. To me, that says that the spaces are in line with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan. Where there has been an issue is raised in terms of plot 7, where there's linear parking and there is an issue around the manoeuvrability of the parking spaces. However, that only relates to a single dwelling and wouldn't represent a reason for refusal.
Chair, can I just come back? I take your point on spaces, okay, but that doesn't relate to the garage, which was the other question, and that doesn't mention that in there. It does mention the space, but doesn't mention the garage.
So I'll ask this question another way. Have we told County the dimensions of the garage and the car parking spaces?
Well, County have confirmed that it conforms with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan, and the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan sets out the sizes of the garages and the parking spaces.
If it sits outside the garages and there aren't enough spaces, I'm really sorry, but there's 3 spaces per dwelling. So if we're not including the garages, then it doesn't conform with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan. And you'll excuse me if I'm not confident with County being accurate.
No, I think we have come across a fundamental difference of opinion in terms of the Windlesham Plan and how it has been looked at and interpreted by Surrey County Council. Is that a fair summation?
I think it's part of it, but I haven't had any assurance that we have shared with County the space sizes, the garage entrance size, and the sizes of the garages, which is the only way in which this can conform with the neighbourhood plan. My assumption is that they've looked at the number of car parking spaces, and certainly without that information, we cannot approve this application this evening.
I mean, to my mind, where the County Council have said that it accords with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan, if we weren't including the garages as appropriate parking spaces, then none of the units would meet the standards and they wouldn't be able to make that statement. But they have made that statement, and it would be their responsibility to check whether the parking spaces accord with the relevant sizes, as they've said in their statement with the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan.
I think we come to an impasse on this issue. So, going forward, Mr. Chinian.
So we've been measuring the plans off the actual plans which are online. We've got the actual width of the parking 3 metres, and the actual depth is 6 metres.
On all parking spaces? Sorry, I'll put this on all parking spaces, because there are 3 plots with smaller parking spaces from that front to the back, and also we need the width of the garage and the entrance of the width and length of the garage, which is larger than that, and the entrance, and the density. So all of those are in Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan.
Councillor Wheeler, just looking at the plans for 2 of the garages, and it shows, yes, the garage is 6 metres deep, 3 metres wide, and the entrance looks about 2.3 metres. You know,
You won't be surprised to know that I'm delighted to say that that is not in keeping with the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, which needs a width of 3 metres by 7 metres, and the entrance size, I'm not sure if it's 4.1, I think it's 4.1 is the policy number, but the entrance size is also stipulated, given that we all have wider cars these days, mine is particular obese. So actually, if it's that size, it doesn't adhere with the Windlesham neighbourhood plan. So thank you very much for confirming.
Councillor Wilson.
Can I ask about page 22, section 7.7 on biodiversity, and that's also on page 26, condition 8. Am I right in saying that for large applications, there is already a 10% biodiversity net gain requirement? The council's policy in the regulation 18 local plan is for a 20% when the local plan comes in, a 20% biodiversity net gain, and it's only in about a month's time, on the 2nd of April, that minor applications like this one will have to comply with that biodiversity net gain as well.
So in terms of the actual policy for the council, we've got to stick to 10% because obviously the local plan has no weight at its current time. The ambition is to look at 20% in the future, and that will get more weight as soon as we go through the local plan process. In terms of this application, it came prior to the adoption of the new legislation, which I believe is coming into force in April of this year. So it wouldn't actually wouldn't need to require the 10% because obviously the application came in before that deadline and before the legislation was actually granted. But in terms of this application, it has been assessed by Surrey Wildlife Trust, and there are mitigation measures they are putting in place as part of the application to improve the sort of landscaping, the overall hard and soft landscaping on the site. But there's no requirement to actually provide 10% on its current application at its moment in time.
And although it's not a legal requirement just yet, although it will be in a month and a bit, could we add to condition 8 a requirement for a 10% biodiversity net gain?
I think it'd be very unreasonable to do that because obviously this application came in prior to the adoption of that legislation, and legislation is quite clear on that. Anything which comes in before that legislation should not have 10% BNG on that. Anything which comes afterwards has that requirement on it. So we need to be very mindful of that to not actually retrofit in terms of the requirement of future legislation, which yet hasn't come into force for minor applications.
Yeah, I understand, but it's not within the power of this committee to change condition 8 then?
Correct. That's what I'm advising, yes.
Thank you.
Could I just come back very quickly, please, because I know that we've had subsequent conversations. Can I just say that, as I said before, I will not be supporting this plan on the basis that it does not adhere to 3 key points within the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, and we've not been able to evidence that it does. We're always told within a planning committee that we must determine the application on the information that is in front of us. And with the information that we've been provided with this evening, we therefore, I feel, if we are going to do what we're legally required to do, which is to adhere to the Windlesham neighbourhood plan, we have to, unfortunately, not agree with the officer's recommendation, and we need not to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
This was just a tiny contribution. Paragraph 7.6.6, the very last sentence, it says Windlesham Road is also served by a pedestrian pathway. It's not. There's no pavements in Windlesham Road.
Thank you. I think we have discussed this. We have an officer recommendation to grant subject to conditions. Does anyone wish to propose that? In which case, does Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you. I would like to propose that we go against the officer's recommendation to approve on the basis that it does not adhere to the Windlesham neighbourhood neighbourhood plans, I think it's 4.1 and 4.2, and 2.1, which relates directly to the parking space size requirement and the adherence with maintaining the established density within residential areas. Thank you.
Are you offering to second?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to second it and add to that list of issues the loss of habitats from the trees and the design problem that the urban design consultant noticed in, I think it's 7.4.10, about a lack of placemaking in the design, and the neighbours can't meet each other. Thank you.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I'm in a position to actually express a view on this one way or the other at the moment, because of the issues associated with the Windlesham local plan. How would the officers and the chair react to the proposition that that this matter is deferred pending the confirmation of some of the issues which have been raised in respect of the Windlesham local plan and some of the various other matters which have been raised this evening?
I think Councillor Wheeler has made a proposal and that has been seconded. We therefore are duty bound to vote on that proposal. There was no proposal to follow the officer's recommendation. Therefore, there is a counter proposal from Councillor Wheeler, and we must now, I think, vote on that proposal, that the application be refused. If at some future time somebody wants to come back, then that's up to them. All in favour of the recommendation to refuse? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Against?
Chair.
We haven't called out the names. Oh, you want to call out the names? Yeah. I believe we have to call out the names. Please, up again.
So all those for the alternative proposal to refuse, please raise your hand. So that's Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Mary Glowett, Councillor Liz Noble, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Murray Rowlands, Councillor Helen Whitcroft, Councillor Victoria Wheeler, Councillor Valerie White, and Councillor Richard Wilson. Anyone against? Councillor David Whitcroft. Any abstentions?
That's me, I suppose, yes.
Councillor Cliff Betton.
Thank you.
Can I just seek clarification that the actual reasons that you're putting forward are
planning reasons
put towards the chair and vice chair for the precise wording to be agreed? Because at the moment it's just reference to the Windlesham neighbourhood plan without detail behind that, and it's very important that we have that detail behind that in terms of going forward in terms of the actual reasoning.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler, as you are the vice chair, could you?
Yeah, absolutely happy with that. Okay. Very happy to pad out and give additional detail.
Thank you. Thank you, members.
Sorry.
She said the reasons.
No, but it's vague. No, but the reasons, the actual breakdown of the actual reasons.
Okay. Victoria, I am informed that we need the reasons now.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate them again. That's fine. So the planning application, I'm sure that others will chip in on their additional reasons, and if we can have advice as to whether or not they are relevant. But the application is refused as it fails to meet the planning size standards, which are part of the adopted Windlesham neighbourhood plan, and that's policy numbers. I think again, I may need to check this. I think it's 4.1 and 4.2, and that in addition to that, it fails to respond to meet policy number 2.1 and does not respond positively or respect the built and natural character features or the setting, maintaining the established density of residential units and ratio as per the Windlesham neighbourhood plan. And I will leave it to one of my fellow Windlesham councillors to come in on the points that he wanted to raise.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if we could also include weight given to 7.4.10 about the design inadequacies that was noted by the urban design consultant about placemaking. And secondly, the loss of trees, the loss of habitat and biodiversity. And thirdly, lack of any affordable homes. And fourthly, the huge increase in the development number of dwellings required from just 5 years ago's estimate. If you increase it by 68%, it's still a lot less than is already approved. And the development in the policy should be concentrated in the west of the borough. Thank you.
Thank you. Gavin?
I think in terms of affordable housing, that is not a reason which I think the council could easily defend, because this is not a scheme which is liable for any affordable housing. It's less than 10 units in terms of the units being proposed. In terms of biodiversity, 7.7 has outlined exactly, it's got support by Surrey Wildlife Trust as well. So I think the council would be on difficult grounds to defend that, given a statutory, given a consultee has actually given comments to us, raising no objections on that grounds, and given that there's no requirement in legislation to actually provide any biodiversity on this site, and given the current legislation hasn't come out yet on minor developments as well. So I'll be very mindful not to put those as reasons as part of this application.
If it's not biodiversity, can it just be the loss of trees? Because it is noted that I think 11 trees will be lost, and it was mentioned by one of the speakers about they give protection from noise and air pollution.
So again, in terms of loss of trees, I mean, obviously it's been, they've submitted, the applicant has submitted a tree survey as part of the application. It's been supported by our tree officer. I think there's a loss of about 11 trees from the site, and a category B and C trees, which are going to be lost from the site. In terms of air quality and noise, again, that's been supported by our environmental health officers as well. So we need to be mindful of those comments as well if the applicant does go to appeal as well on these reasons.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting rejecting it totally for that reason, but it's part of an accumulation of reasons.
I just think we can't put those reasons if we've basically if the application is adhering and complying with those parts of the policies, and also we've got experts who have given us comments on it as well and don't raise any objections. So my advice is to follow the advice of the specialists of the council, and not to include them as reasons for refusal as part of this application.
Okay.
Okay with that? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda.
It's okay. It's okay. And we summarise the reasons for refusal and then vote on them again, just so.
Okay. We would like to summarise the reasons and vote on them again, so that we are absolutely clear.
Sorry, I'm just saying we have voted on the refusal. We gave the outline reasons for refusal. I talked about the three major policies that we weren't adhering to, and all I've done really is to read those policies out in detail for the members that don't live and breathe the Windlesham neighbourhood plan in quite the same way that I do. So I'll take guidance, but we've got a proposal, we voted on that proposal, and we do normally just clarify the reasons for refusal once we've done that for the wording.
I think, sorry, just to interrupt, I think it's Councillor Wilson's points that came and went, which of those are actually going to be listed as reasons?
Well, I think from guidance that was given by Gavin, we can't list any of those because they wouldn't be defendable at an appeal, whereas the 3 reasons that were given originally absolutely were defendable, and I'm looking at my colleagues, I think they were the ones that were supported. So, because yours came in afterwards, didn't it?
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I think, can we still use the point in 7.4.10 about the deficiency in the design that was noted by the urban design consultant?
That's reasonable in terms of the placemaking argument, yes. I mean, to summarise what you've said, you've got first reason is to parking's the size standards 4.1 and 4.2. The second reason to do with the built and natural character and density, and you refer to 2.1 in the Windlesham Neighbourhood Plan. And the third one is 7.4.10, placemaking, paragraph 7.4.10. That's what I've got as the summary of the reasons. And the precise wording to be agreed with the Chair and Vice Chair.
Can we have a vote on those reasons? Everybody all in favour?
If you put your hand up and I'll call your name out. So for the alternative proposal with the detail. So for the alternative proposal with the detail, so that's 4 is Councillor Sean Garrett. Councillor Mary Garrett, have you got your hand up there? Yeah. Councillor Liz Noble. Councillor David O'Mahony. Councillor Murray Rowlands. Councillor Helen Whitcroft. Councillor Victoria Wheeler. Councillor Valerie White. Councillor Richard Wilson. Anyone against? Councillor David Whitcroft. And any abstentions? Councillor Cliff Betton.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on. Item number 5 on the agenda, application 23/1224, 36 the Maultway. We have 2 public speakers on this who will be invited forward after the officer has given his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal relates to the redevelopment of the site for 24 units, comprising 9 times 1 bedroom flats and 15 dwellings, following the demolition of the existing dwelling. The application is referred to the committee as it is a major development. The 9 flats would be affordable units, 2 being first homes and the remaining 7 in shared ownership. The site measures approximately 0.5 hectares in size, comprising a single dwelling situated on the western side of the Maultway, close to the overpass of the M3. To the north of the site are the properties of Oak and Copes, detached dwellings on irregular shaped plots with large gardens, whilst to the west, where the land slopes down away from the centre of the site, are the terraced dwellings of Curtis and Martel Close. To the east, to the opposite side of the Maultway, is a site of nature conservation importance, whilst the M3 is situated to the south. Sorry, just bear with me. The proposed access into the site would be relocated a further 4.8 metres down from the Maultway, away from Oak and Copes. However, due to the intensification of the access, together with the 50 mph speed limit on the road, it is considered insufficiently set away from the neighbouring access, and highway safety concerns are raised. This forms a reason for refusal. The proposed development would move the existing Objections are also raised with regards to the layout, which is dominated around the need for car parking, which results in insufficient soft landscaping, no pedestrian footpath through the site, lack of placemaking, and poor relationship between the properties. The proposed dwellings and flatted block fronting the Maultway are insufficiently set back, with insufficient planting proposed, introducing prominent additions to the street scene that fail to maintain or enhance the existing verdant character. The Proposed heights would be considered out of character with the area, which is characterised principally by two-storey development. The proposed design and form of the buildings, including their roof design, have also been poorly considered, resulting in properties of unequal proportions, appearing top-heavy and unattractive. The relationship between plot 10 to the southwest of the site and number 24 Martel Close is also considered unacceptable, owing to the forward projection of number 10, together with the limited separation distance between the properties, resulting in harm to the neighbouring occupiers' current level of outlook and daylight and sunlight. The proposal only provides one-bedroom units as affordable, failing to provide a tenure and mix of affordable housing in line with the identified housing need. The application is not supported by a viability assessment and therefore has failed to sufficiently justify the proposed mix, forming another reason for refusal. The proposer has also failed to provide sufficient information to demonstrate adequate sound and ventilation levels can be achieved to ensure an adequate standard of accommodation, whilst insufficient information has been submitted to demonstrate that it would not have harm on protected species or on the adjacent site of nature conservation importance. The proposer has also failed to demonstrate an adequate drainage scheme and failed to provide a suitable, safe and convenient means for future residents to use sustainable modes of transport to access schools, employment and leisure facilities. The application is therefore recommended for refusal.
Thank you. We have two public speakers. First of all, Miss Kamar, if I said that properly.
Hi everyone.
You can sit.
I was rather stand, so
Okay.
I can point if that's okay.
Yeah, you have 4 minutes, 3 minutes warning. Time starts when you're ready.
Thank you. My name's Maxine Kamar. I'm resident at 12 Curtis Close on Wellington Park with my partner Kevin Goodbody.
Sorry. I think you'll have to sit because we can't hear you.
Okay, start again, right? My name's Maxine Kamar. I'm resident at 12 Curtis Close on Wellington Park with my partner Kevin Goodbody, and the proposed development backs directly onto our boundary. Missing from Surrey Heath planning application is a cross-section diagram right across the proposed development and down into Wellington Park. Myself and my partner have aired our concerns on a number of occasions, and either we're not explaining the issue well, or perhaps it's being ignored or batted away as a non-issue, but it is very much an issue. So we've designed a diagram ourselves to share with you. This is drawn to scale based on the levels and heights from the planning application and also the Surrey Heath interactive map. And as you can see from the diagram, the issue is pretty obvious. So here's 12 Curtis Close, my property. At the moment we have trees backing onto Threapwood, but the proposed development, the new home here, with the trees being taken down, which is what's being proposed by the builder. Standing on my patio looking across, I'm right in the eye line of the nearest neighbour and vice versa. They're able to look straight into our garden and into our home, which is completely unacceptable. It's then amplified by the neighbours being upstairs with even more visibility into our neighbouring houses. So the first thing, moving to the trees. So as I just mentioned, the builders want to take these trees down, trees and shrubs which have been there for a very long time. Removing these would obviously not only cause the privacy issue, as I've just described, but also the trees block some of the noise, and very important for the local wildlife, the birds and squirrels and so on and so forth. The other issue with the trees links to the soil and drainage. So at the moment, the soil behind our boundary, which is here, this is our fence, acts as a natural soak away for rainwater and so on. The issue will be that once the building development goes ahead, and then if neighbours decide to extend their property, put a hard standing in for an office outside, gym or astroturf, all of which they can do without planning information, what will happen to that additional surface water? It's got nowhere to go. It will come into our garden and we'll end up with a swimming pool in our back garden, which isn't the idea. So this is a real issue, and it simply hasn't been thoroughly thought through or addressed, coupled with the fact that the builders also think it's a good idea to put cycle sheds right behind our fence for those properties behind us. They will need a hard standing. They'll be digging and drilling down into behind our fence, which will destabilise the soil and fencing. It's ill considered and it hasn't been thought through, let alone the noise and just the general having somebody right behind your fence there.
1 minute left.
The other issue, very close to the end, is the pathway. On my deeds and also on the Surrey Heath interactive map, there's a pathway behind here. This has been completely ignored by the builders. It does exist. This needs to be reviewed. And my final point is, who's going to be legally responsible for damage to our garden, fencing, walls, when this issue with rainwater comes, which it will. It won't be the builder because they'll be off on their next jaunt. Will it be Surrey Heath? Because what are we going to do when we've got issues with our fence, our garden, water damage? It needs to be addressed, and we really urge you, before any further planning is considered, that we have full
Time's up.
visibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Garrett first.
Thank you. Going back to your diagram, then the removal of trees. On the plans, is there any plan to put a fence? I know you're saying they're going to put a bike rack. Is there a fence as well, or are they literally just going to leave it with your fence that's already there?
It's not clear. Our fence will definitely stay,
Yeah, of course,
because obviously that's our boundary, but it's not clear.
Okay. So there's nothing.
It's really not clear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to talk. It's always very daunting. It's how I started sitting here, so be careful.
I remember that.
Could you just orientate that for me, please, in terms of north, south, east and west?
So our back garden is north facing.
It's a north-facing
Yes,
back
yes.
garden. Okay, lovely, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Whitcroft.
At some point, Chair, could we have I believe it's number 12?
Yes.
Pointed out to us on one of the diagrams, not necessarily now, but at some point. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? No?
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. Lee. You've probably heard it before, but you've got 4 minutes and a 3-minute warning.
Good evening. I'll just bring some context. I live at number 13 Curtis Close, obviously adjacent to obviously the objection that you've just heard. I also object to the development from the initial sort of scheme, and it's principally about the layout, because it doesn't show ways that the appearance of the characteristics of the dwellings would be in keeping with the surrounding area. So, for instance, obviously Wellington Park, but also that will impact on the natural habitat around, and there's obviously the biodiversity that would affect. So, obviously the dwellings would be, obviously there's a single dwelling there at the moment, but obviously that has a significant change in the layout and the kind of landscaping, and I think that impact is really something that resonates with myself, because I think just being a resident within Wellington Park, there is something kind of endearing with the fact that you're living within that kind of environment that you have got accustomed to, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm just also raising concerns about the elevation and the contouring. So the natural contouring, as you've seen in the diagram that Maxine had shown, that the drainage could be the concern and the issue that would have impact on potentially the erosion of the land that would happen if that habitat is changed. So the natural kind of obviously reinforcement of trees and obviously the boundary line. And just in summary, just make this succinct, I just think it is about the characteristics, the change of characteristics that will happen in the area if this proposal would take place, and just also just the impact on the natural environment.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, anyone have a question for Mr. Lean? No? Thank you very much indeed. Well, you've had the officer's presentation. Could we get up the diagram with numbers 12 and 13?
If I'm correct, this is number 12 and this is number 13.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Sorry, would you mind indicating those again, please?
That's number 12 over here and number 13 next door.
Okay. Councillor Garrett, you had a question.
Thank you. It's probably more of a comment than a question, actually. I mean, I've been doing this a couple of years now. This looks like the list of not acceptable things seems to be the longest I've seen. So it doesn't make any sense to do anything other than refuse it. I think it's also the first time I've actually seen highways not accept something that's come through. And bearing in mind I've travelled down that road on a regular basis, the idea of cars coming out of there when it's a 50-mile-an-hour road sounds like danger, an accident just waiting to happen. So everything in this report, and thank you for obviously the officers putting this together, leads me to believe there is no reason to do anything other than to refuse it, in my opinion.
Does anybody else have anything to add, Councillor Wheeler?
I just want reassurance, as Councillor Garrett says, it's a nice long list of reasons for refusal, but we don't seem to have commented on the topography, and we have only pointed out a residential harm to one development. Looking at that site plan, it would appear the potential to enjoy residential amenity actually impacts more than number 24, and certainly from the feeling of the residents it impacts number 12 and number 13. I must confess I'm slightly confused as to how they can put a bike store on that boundary when what looks like on the plans is actually a back garden. And also if there is a path there, the loss of that path is also something that potentially I feel we should look at adding as an additional reason for a refusal. But certainly I think a general impact on residential amenity, given the topography, would be something, if we can add it, would be helpful.
I think when considering the topography of the site, yes, it does slope down towards those properties on Curtis Close and Martel Close. However, when we look at number 12, 13, and I think it is 14 and 15 there of Curtis Close, the separation distance between those properties and the rear elevations, the separation distance between the rear elevations is about 20 metres. And so whilst there is the topography issue, I think that separation distance is sufficient that there wasn't a significant harm on amenity for us to warrant a reason for refusal on those grounds. Whereas if we look at the plot 10 and number 34 Martel Close, where we've raised an objection to, the proposed development would sit forward of the neighbouring property quite significantly and be only 3 metre separation distance away. For that reason, that topography difference makes a huge impact relative to the impact to number 12 and 13 Curtis Close. So that's why it was not included. And then just turning in terms of the bike store comment, I mean, as I would understand it, these wouldn't be fixed onto the ground. The final location of them could be moved, but I take that point.
I was going to say, if I can just come back on that, if there is a bike stall and if it's of a reasonable height, and given that the land is higher, there is going to be the opportunity for overlooking. I had small boys, they used to climb on top of things, pretty much anything and everything. And the other thing as well is, have we got a detailed SUDS within the application? Because obviously the surface runoff from patio hardstanding and additional hardstanding, because it's just one small property at the moment, isn't there, on the northern edge of that development. Is there a SUDS plan within the development plan? Because if not, I think the lack of that would potentially be another reason for refusal, again, bearing in mind the topography.
In terms of the cycle stalls, I mean, that would be subject to, if it was to be approved, subject to a condition requiring the details of the design and the final position of that. The drainage details, it forms a reason for refusal. The LLFA have commented that it's unacceptable. I can't remember which reason for it.
I think it's reason for refusal 9 on page 62. Insufficient information has been submitted by rail drainage scheme to demonstrate the proposed development would not result in adverse harm to drainage and flood risk of the surrounding area. So that's in there.
Thank you. I hadn't clocked that one in too much detail. I've been spending a lot of detail on some of the others.
Councillor Cope, welcome. As a visitor, you also, I'm afraid, have a time limit of 8 minutes.
You'll be pleased to know that I won't be using 8 minutes. Yeah, obviously I'm the ward councillor for this area. I just wanted to just come back on that residential amenity point because I've been and visited these gardens and that slope is very pronounced. So although it may be slightly further away from Curtis Close, when it comes to sort of the angle of where that building's going to be, it's almost not really a 2-storey building, it's almost a 3-storey building in terms of how much it imposes over those gardens. And also I wondered, has there been any analysis on the impact on 34, the Maultway? Because I forget which unit it is, but I think it's the top one on the plan. It is very close to that building as well, based on having a little walk around on a few occasions.
Thank you.
Just in terms of 34, the Maultway, I mean, the relationship between that property and plot 19, there isn't the issue of the topography so much, but that separation distance is considered sufficient to mitigate that impact, whilst there is landscaping on oaken copes, which helps also to further mitigate that impact, whilst there would be a side-to-side relationship also. In terms of the topography issue and whether, I guess that's down to members whether they want to add that as a reason, as forming part of the reason for refusal.
Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Just the mention of the footpath, can I just ask, is there a public footpath there that is being lost as a result of this application, if this application were to be approved?
It was raised by residents, but it wasn't something that I was able to identify on site or through our X-maps.
Now, sorry, just coming to that point, I can see on the definitive map of Surrey County Council's website, it's not a public footpath.
I think we have Councillor Noble. One last point.
Thank you, Chair. So if it's not a public footpath, is it a footpath by custom and use?
That I can't tell.
We've heard the arguments, we've heard the objections. We have an officer recommendation to refuse. Does anyone? Councillor Garrett, seconder. Councillor White. So the recommendation is that the application be refused. All those in favour of the officer.
Can we just clarify conditional reason?
No, we don't. Thank you. Hands up.
That's unanimous.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Next item. Application number 231100, Watchmoor Park.
Thank you, Chair. The application relates to a hybrid planning application, part outline, part full planning application for the demolition of the existing office buildings and construction of up to 29,358 square metres of flexible e.g. III, B2 and B8 use class space together with associated landscaping and parking. The application is presented as it is a major development. The application site forms part of the Watchmoor Park Business Park, a designated core employment area situated within the settlement boundaries. The site is accessed directly off the A331 to the west and comprises 7 office buildings. The newly completed Stihl HQ building is situated to the north of the site, while Sainsbury's is to the south. These photos show the context of Watchmoor Park. The entrance from the A331 benefits from a number of mature trees which somewhat screen the site from the A road, whilst the site is characterised by its formal landscaping layout, which includes street-lined trees. The buildings are largely set back from Riverside Way, with formal car parking spaces situated to the front of buildings. All of the buildings within the red line boundary would be demolished, with each of the starred buildings currently vacant. The works would be phased, with phase 1, the full application relating to the demolition of the 2 vacant buildings north of Riverside Way, whilst the demolition of the buildings south of Riverside Way would form part of the second phase of development for the outline proposal. The earliest lease of the remaining buildings in occupation expires in 2026. The full application would comprise of a single building, Unit 1, which would measure 72 metres depth by 134 metres width and a maximum height of 18 metres, set away 13 metres from Riverside Way. The outline part of the development is subject to a parameters plan, with the development to this part comprising a maximum floor space of 19,000 square metres, with no single unit having a floor space greater than 13,000 square metres, no buildings to be taller than 19 metres in height, and the proposed use is to align with that proposed. Whilst all matters are reserved, an indicative plan is shown which would allow for a total of 4 units on this part of the site. Phase 1 of the development will require 17 trees to be removed from the site to facilitate the development. 71 replacement trees would be planted to the front of the site adjacent to the A331, helping to enhance the verdant entrance to the site. No objections have been raised by the Council's arboricultural officer, nor any objections from Surrey Wildlife Trust. The CGIs produced here show how the proposed building would blend into the surrounding area, with the simplified light tone design and subtle contrast of materials helping to reduce the overall visual bulk of the development. No objections have been raised by the Council's urban design consultant, whilst the scheme was subject to a design review process. The applicant has demonstrated that there is a need to redevelop the business park, with national and local trends indicating a strong market demand for the proposed uses against falling office demand, highlighted by the 68% vacancy rate within the business park. The proposal is expected to generate a net 496 jobs relative to the existing take-up of office space, whilst contributing £40.6 million per annum to the economy, calculated via the number of jobs and gross value added per worker. No end occupier has been confirmed for either phase of the development, and therefore the speculative nature of the proposed uses allows flexibility for the future occupants. The outline application is expected to respond to the market needs of the time once the final leases expire. The proposal would therefore provide an increased employment benefit, provide a use that is sought after within the functional economic area, whilst being appropriately located within the core employment area, with good links to the strategic road network. It is therefore recommended acceptable in principle. No objections have been raised by the Council's policy team, arboricultural officer or the urban design consultant, whilst no objections have been raised by the Surrey County Council nor the statutory highway consultees. Subject to a legal agreement securing biodiversity net gain benefit and the financial contribution towards the travel plan auditing, it is recommended that the application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. I must declare a tangential non-pecuniary interest in that my business is located in Watchmoor Park. It's not affected by this part of the development, but it's over the fence. Members, any questions for the officer? Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. I really believe this is quite a commendable application in that it reflects the problems that this particular development at Watchmoor Park are currently experiencing. And it's a good attempt at refurbishing or re-establishing an operating system for the accommodation that's available there. As far as job creation is concerned, there's a reasonable expectation of about 450 plus more jobs being established as a result of the change in use which is happening. Obviously reflecting the fact that the original office use was no longer providing that sort of employment. So it's a very effective way of replacing an existing system or accommodation with build that reflects a current demand for that type of property. There are various plans that the replacement authority is talking about and using up-to-date methods. They apparently are very aware of the making it environmentally satisfactory in terms of carbon capture. And I believe it's very praiseworthy in the way they're proposing to proceed. This is based on an observation last week. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. I suppose it's a question. I take on board the point that obviously since COVID, a lot more people are working at home, so there's less office space required. I get that. But also before COVID and still, I've noticed there's a lot of big units being built and still sit empty. Now, it says the owner believes they will generate net 406 permanent jobs. Does this mean they've actually got someone lined up that actually wants the initial building, which means brilliant, or is it potentially going to sit there as we knock something down, we put something up, and then it sits there for an indefinite period of time?
In terms of the employment calculation, that's been calculated based on the employment floor space provided, as well as the construction jobs and the external impacts as well. If we look at the type of use that's been proposed, if we look at Surrey Heath in general, where a number of these units have come about in the last couple of years, they've all had 100% take-up. So given the market trends, I would expect, and given the need for this type of use in the functional economic area, I'd expect these units to be taken up fairly quickly. I doubt they would sit.
Yep.
Just ask a point of clarification. So that net 406, that actually includes the builders that would be building the new unit. So that wouldn't be, once it's finished, there would be 406 net employees. That actually includes the builders. Is that correct?
So no, so it'd be 511 full-time equivalent jobs and then additional 137 jobs to be created through the construction process.
Brilliant, thank you.
Just as a point of interest, FedEx are there already. Yeah, lots of it. Anybody else got any questions? No? We have an officer recommendation to grant the application. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Glowett, a seconder, Councillor Rowlands. All those in favour of the officer recommendation? Unanimous. Unanimous.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. Application number 231147, Farnborough Airport consultation. Councillor White.
I forgot at the beginning. I'd just like to declare my husband's a pilot, but I don't know whether he flies into Farnborough or not. I don't ask him.
Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. This proposal relates to a consultation application for Farnborough Airport to be determined by Rushmore Borough Council. This council is a consultee only. This proposal is to increase the number of flights per annum from 50,000 to 70,000. Within this overall total, increase the number of weekend flights from 8,900 to 18,900 and increase the threshold of aircraft size from 50 to 55 tonnes, retaining a maximum aircraft weight of 80 tonnes. The measurement is taken from the maximum takeoff weights of aircraft, i.e. including fuel. Within the overall total, an increase in the number of these larger aircraft, that is from 55 to 80 tonnes, the number of their flights from 1,500 to 2,100, and amends the accident risk contours, but these will fall within Rushmore Borough and do not directly affect this borough. Currently, there are about 24,000 flights per annum, and the average number of passengers is 2.6 per flight. In imagining the threshold of the size of aircraft as a comparison, 50 to 55 tonnes equates to roughly a scheduled 130 passenger aircraft, and 70 tonnes equates to roughly a 200 passenger aircraft. For your information, I'll briefly lead you through the plans and photos, and please note the update. Okay.
Do you want to pause?
Yeah, we're just going to pause.
Sorry about that. Let us continue with Farnborough Airport.
This proposal relates to a consultation application for Farnborough Airport to be determined by Rushmore Borough Council. This council is a consultee only. This proposal is to increase the number of flights per annum from 50,000 to 70,000. Total, to increase the number of weekend flights from 8,900 to 18,900. To increase the threshold of aircraft size from 50 to 55 tonnes, retaining a maximum aircraft weight of 80 tonnes. The measurement is taken from the maximum takeoff weight of aircraft, including fuel. Within the overall total, an increase in the number of these larger aircraft, that is from 55 to 80 tonnes, from 1,500 to 2,100. And amend the accident risk contours, but these will fall within Rushmore Borough and do not directly affect this borough. Currently, there are about 24,000 flights per annum, and the average number of passengers is 2.6 per flight. In imagining the threshold size of aircraft as a comparison, 50 to 55 tonnes equates to roughly a scheduled 130 passenger aircraft, and 70 tonnes equates to roughly a 200 passenger aircraft. For information, I'll briefly lead you, please be aware of the update, and I'll briefly lead you through the plans and photos. So this is the application site outlined in red to the southwest of this borough. It is a 281 hectare site in Farnborough, south of the town centre. The dotted line on this plan shows the borough boundaries, and that's the location of Surrey Heath. The airport is located a minimum of about 1.5 kilometres from the borough boundary and about 2.1 kilometres from the nearest housing in Grove Farm and Water's Edge, so over here. The aerial photo on the right shows the runway, which measures 2.81 kilometres in length, orientated on a southwest to northeast axis. This slide provides a layout for the airport with the majority of the buildings on the north side of the runway in this location, and the image on the right is the control tower. It's a photo looking northwest towards the main airport buildings, and an image from the end of the runway. This is an image of the main flight paths, which show the main flight path heading northeast, outlined in that sort of darker orange, into the airport, over the south part of the borough, descending from Bisley and the southwest edge of Chobham to Mitchett over Deepcut. The flight path that then diverts south over Guildford and Woking boroughs. The typical aircraft heights range from 1,000 feet over Mitchett to 3,000 feet over Bisley. Flights land against the prevailing winds, and so 70% of incoming flights into the airport fly from over this borough. This slide provides the number of summer daily noise events at a level of 65 decibels or above, projected from 2040 with on the left and without on the right the development. So on the left it's the one which should be noisier because that's with this proposal, on the right without. 65 decibels equates to the same noise level as normal conversation. The right-hand image shows increased numbers of such events. So the left-hand image shows those increases of such events from under 100 without the development to over 100 with the development. And that's the change of colour from green to yellow with the Mitchett area just here. The impacts on borough residents from the more significant proportionate increase in weekend flights is also of particular concern. Reason 1, as set out in the agenda report on page 155, raises an objection on noise impact for local residents within this borough. However, the additional text on the update draws attention to the impact of weekends. This slide shows the scoping on the left-hand side for the impact on biodiversity sensitive sites, such as the special protection area shown in yellow and blue, and special areas of conservation in yellow. Concerns as set out in reason 3 are raised to biodiversity assessment not reflecting on sites outside of the circle, including Chobham Common, which forms part of the Thames Basin Heath SBA. The right-hand plan shows features of impacts, including sites of nature conservation interest, which are the purple areas, and the SBA is in green. The area east of the A331, very broadly, is within this borough. That sort of slither here. The blue squares are buildings of interest and include listed buildings. The council raised further objections to the proposal on the potential impact on the M3 air quality management area from increased road traffic associated with the proposal. That's set out in reason 2. Potential impact on climate change, and that's reason 4. And that the economic benefits to the borough do not outweigh the harm, which is reason 5. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to say? Victoria?
Thank you. I am sorry. Just to bring up, I think I did mention it before, but whether or not there's anything that we can look at, and just reminding them and pointing them to the Heathrow noise consultation, which looks at the change in noise. So if you're in a quieter area, which obviously impacts Chobham and Windlesham, West End to some extent, the impact of noise is more keenly felt than if you're in a more built-up area. And in addition to that, whether or not there would be any risk of viability to Fair Oaks Airport, which is an area of strategic employment within the borough. Thank you.
In terms of the cumulative impact on noise, to include Heathrow, government guidance indicates that flights over 4,000 feet in altitude are unlikely to result in noise exposure above the lowest observed adverse effect. This definition is summarised in paragraph 7.3.11 of the agenda report on page 151 and expanded upon by the environmental health comments provided on pages 158 and 159. Over this borough, Heathrow flights are typically 5,000 to 10,000 feet in altitude. Whilst they may be noticeable in the east part of the borough, the impact would be below the level that would have an impact, that would have a cumulative impact with the Farnborough Airport flights. In terms of the response on Fair Oaks itself, Fair Oaks Airport has a circular traffic zone with a radius of 3.7 kilometres around the airport, which takes it just up to and just past Chobham Village. The airspace zone is up to a height of 1,500 feet, and that height is limited by Heathrow and what happens above, and would be to the east of the flight path. At the east edge of the flight path, and I'll show it here, in this sort of area here, this is where it may cross underneath, and there may be a tiny overlap between the two airspaces. The height of the aircraft at that point, 3,000 feet, way above the 1,500 restriction in Fair Oaks. Of course, in terms of safety, flights are controlled by the air control tower in any case, but we can't find that there is evidence that the proposal would result in an adverse effect on operations at Fair Oaks.
If I could just come back, that is more about anyone choosing to fly out of Farnborough rather than coming to Fair Oaks. So there are some medical flights that go into Fair Oaks. We've obviously got the helicopters which go into Fair Oaks, as well as the very light aircraft that fly in and out of there. So is there any risk that those aircraft would be attracted to Farnborough rather than continuing to use Fair Oaks? That was my point in terms of viability, rather than the sort of traffic space things.
In terms of the pure economic argument about where somebody chooses to use, that falls outside of the remit of what we can we can control in terms of policy, etc. I would be surprised if, because of the different sizes of those airports and the very different markets they go for, the very different work they do, I'd be surprised if there is that this would harm the operations at Fair Oaks. Though that contour is on the noise contour, so that shows you where the noise, concentration of the noise on those incoming flights would be. It shows that as you come into it, you get a more concentrated line of approach, as you'd expect coming into the airport, and it disperses if you're flying out on the southwest edge of the runway. But I think that once you move away from that orange area, which is the direct result of the majority of the planes coming in to land there, the noise drops off quite markedly from that plan.
Councillor Whitcroft. Councillor Owens.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, represent Mitchett, which is the most impacted Surrey Heath ward, simply because approaching aircraft have got to line up with the runway, self-evidently, which is only a mile or so away, as we've heard from the Surrey Heath border. The other part of my ward, Deepcut, is also directly overflown, but a little bit further out. I had planned this evening, you'll be somewhat disappointed to learn, to speak for quite a long time about various aspects of this, but I find, perhaps to please you, that that actually isn't necessary, because the report is extremely detailed, and it also benefits, by the way, from being much more understandable than a lot of reports on this issue. The issues are complex and technical, and as we've seen, to do with safety zones and noise, and we could go on about the environmental issues all night, and the issue as to how justifiable it is for private aircraft with an average passenger count of 2.6 to create the impact which it does on the local area. Having said that, there are some benefits which the airport brings clearly in terms of employment and economic activity. So I'm just going to limit myself to a few illustrations, if I might, of the impact of the airport on specifically Mitchett homes. Some 900 Mitchett homes are directly under the flight path, which, for those of you that know the area, is roughly around the Colford Bridge Road part of Mitchett. There's currently, as we've heard, 34,000 flights, which equates to, on average, and we have to be careful with averages, of course, but if we take a simple average, that's 93 per day. 70% of the days of the year, as we've heard, those aircraft are landing. So we've got more than 90 aircraft per day flying over 900 houses at a height of 1,300 feet, which is declining as those aircraft get closer to the airport, and thus the noise increases correspondingly. Under the expansion proposals, that 34,000 flights could potentially increase to 70,000 flights, which is 192, which is another 100 flights a day flying over Mitchett homes on 70% of the time. Now, towards the end of last year, we conducted a survey amongst Mitchett residents, and it came as no great surprise, although it's not a planning issue clearly, that 89% of respondents were not prepared to accept the increased numbers. And the reasons for that are self-evident. The noise which is created by these flights, not to mention the pollution aspects, as in general terms, the jet aircraft fly very low over their homes. There's 2 points I'd like to close on, if I might. One deals with non-weekend flying, and by that we're essentially talking about weekends, of course, plus the odd bank holiday. As we've been told, the total flights at the moment are 34,000. They're planned to increase 70,000 under these proposals. But clearly it's going to take many years, or a considerable number of years, for that difference to be made up. The flights at the weekend, again, as we've heard, are currently running at 8,900. And that limit has been reached at weekends by the airport operator. And in fact, I'm advised by the managing director of the airport that they are turning away weekend flights. So this means that if the proposal to increase that number of weekend flights by 10,000 to the 18,900, which is of course a lot more than double the existing number, that increase is going to have a massive impact on the amenity of residents in Mitchett and further into Surrey Heath as well. And at that level, you're looking at something like 170 flights per day on non-weekdays at weekends. And of course, this increase comes at a time when residents are at home, enjoying the benefit of their gardens or going walking or whatever it is they do in Mitchett at that time. And I think you would agree that impact is quite unacceptable. I referred earlier to the survey which we did, and it's true to say that most residents accept the concept of Farnborough Airport providing facilities for private aircraft in order to relieve the larger airports, namely Heathrow and Gatwick principally. So this isn't a case of NIMBYism, but there is a line which should be drawn on the amount of negative impact that this facility has on residents' amenity. And I think that line is going to be well before 70,000 flights in total and 18,900 flights at weekends. The final point I'd like to make is this. As far as the airport and indeed Rushmoor Council are concerned, Surrey Heath doesn't really exist as far as Farnborough Airport is concerned. The residents of Rushmoor are given certain very limited benefits, such as assistance with double glazing and other noise restriction measures. These are not made available to any homes in Surrey Heath, which in my opinion is outrageous. There are also various community schemes which are operated as a kind of compensation for the impact of the airport. And the number of schemes which have come to Surrey Heath are very, very limited indeed. And I'm not sure that this is a subject which needs to form part of the planning representation, but somebody at this council does need to be writing formally to Rushmoor in particular to ensure that they are aware of this inequitable situation. I'm sorry to have banged on, Chair. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether, I know that the problem has been identified for Mitchett and Deepcut, but I'm certain that at various times with prevailing winds, that areas like St Michael's do get affected by this aircraft noise, especially if you, in the summer, using your gardens, etc. You can't but be conscious of it. So as far as we're concerned in St Michael's, we have the stink plus a pretty heavy concentration of aircraft activity, which often I've noticed if I'm having a relatively early waking, they're limited from 7 o'clock. But I'm looking at my alarm clock, often it's 5:30 or 6 o'clock when you begin to hear them beginning to start. And of course, they seem to predominate over the traffic noise, so it stands out quite clearly that this is actually going on. So I know that, as David was saying, that the really badly affected areas are Mitchett and Deepcut, but certainly there's a knock-on effect for the other parts of Camberley as well.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
I'd like to thank Councillor Whitcroft for his comments, because it's probably answered a lot of the questions I was going to ask, because that sort of cuts back on some of that time. But so initially I was thinking, okay, so we've gone from 28,000 to 50,000 and they're only hitting 34,000, so it's going to take a long time to get there. But based on what you've said, and obviously looking at the papers, it sounds like if the increase for the non-weekday movements is up to 18,900 and they're already restricting them, it's going to quite quickly get up. So I think that's a really valid point, and actually the non-weekday ones are probably are going to be the ones that affect the residents the most, because they're going to be in their gardens in the summer, etc., etc. So certainly agree that we should be making the representation we are. I like the reference to comments about the double glazing as well. Good luck. I don't think we're going to get much out of Rushmore on that, but certainly it'd be worth a try. So my only other question, I think Councillor Whitcroft alluded to it, is someone actually counting these? Because obviously this is X amount that they're allowed, and if they get to that amount, who is the person that polices that and stops them from making more flights?
First of all, just before I answer that question, just to mention that this is part of a proposal to take them to 2040, so that's the slow build-up. But I appreciate what the comments already made about the weekend flights, that they may increase sooner, So, but I think it's a matter for Rushmore Borough Council. I understand that there are conditions that they've got to keep record, as you'd imagine, for all the flights that are taken. And if there is an issue with the number of flights that go over, it would be through their enforcement powers. Thank you.
Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the record, just looking at the number of flights at 7.3.11, 199 events during weekends, and operation at 16 hours over at 7.3.10. Just taking 199, dividing it by 32 hours, that's 6.2 flights per hour on average. That's one every 10 minutes during the 16-hour period for our residents. As ward councillor for Bisley, my residents won't want a flight interrupting their barbecues and their summer enjoyment every 10 minutes. If they can't have a conversation every 10 minutes because of the noise levels. So I'm minded to oppose this proposal.
I don't think you meant that, did you? We are raising an objection.
I'm minded to raise the objection, sorry, yes. Yes, I agree to the objection.
Sorry, Councillor Wheeler, then Councillor Whitcroft again.
It's actually asking a question on behalf of one of my colleagues in the chamber, Emma. Where do they park all of these extra aircraft? So what does it do to the sort of net covered area? Thank you.
As you can imagine, that's in Rushmore Borough, but I'll answer what I can. All I know is that that they've dealt with some permitted development work around extra hard standings in the airport area, but the main area and the taxi, the main area that the aircraft are sort of kept is in this sort of area here, I think, just in front of the main terminal.
I'm assuming there is a risk that it would lead to additional circling as well, because it doesn't look as though they've gone completely mad with additional hard standing for all of these extra aircraft. But
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points of clarification, if I might. There is an organisation called the Farnborough Airport Consultative Committee, which has representatives from this council attending their twice annual meetings. And reports are made to that committee of the amount of aircraft movements being made, and indeed the noise levels which are current. And in fairness to Farnborough Airport Limited, who run the airport now, there is no issue over their counting methods. It's pretty straightforward in the sense that each movement is an aircraft either landing or taking off. So it's not... I guess they have a guy at the end of the runway going one, I don't know. But it might be a bit more sophisticated than that. On the subject of capacity, the airport has changed over the course of the last 10 years in particular. As you can see from that illustration, the airport has changed out of all recognition. It used to be a Ministry of Aviation, as it was called then, facility, and consisted of a bunch of wooden sheds, basically, and a control tower. It's very different now. There are maintenance facilities on the site. There is hard standing for a very large number of aircraft. But of course, by definition, if you're operating private aircraft, the last thing you want is to have them sitting on the ground, so that the turnover is extremely quick. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor White? No? No? Councillor Wheeler? No? Okay. Councillor Rowland.
Just to make a point, one of the features is the use of helicopters based at the airport, and they seem to not have the regular flights. They seem to be very omnipresent and back and forth right throughout the course of weekend afternoons. And that's another base. I mean, we're probably thinking in terms of other sorts of aeroplanes, but these seem to be a perennial nuisance as far as using that airport is concerned.
Thank you. I think we've all agreed that there is an objection being raised, and that's about all we can do, isn't it? Yeah. Do we need to vote to support it?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, you may. Does anyone who wants a second? Councillor Noble. All those in favour of raising an objection, raise your arms. We are unanimous in this. Thank you very much. And finally, application number 231178, 19 the Crofters Deepcut. Welcome, Ms Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Sorry, I'll say that again. Thank you, Mr Chair. There are two updates regarding this proposal before I start my presentation. Two contaminated land conditions have been added and a noise informative. The application is brought to Planning Committee as the applicant is a former planning officer for this council. The application is for the change of use of a section of former military link road into residential garden and the enclosure of that land with a 2 metre high close boarded fence. The area in question measures 6 metres deep by 16 metres wide. The fence would be constructed along the north and east boundaries, the west boundary having been enclosed previously by neighbouring occupants. The road marks the northern boundary of the Destion housing estate and was originally included in the plans for the redevelopment of the Princess Royal Barracks site for housing. However, under subsequent reserve matters applications for the barracks site, The land was excluded, with this redevelopment ending at the northern edge of the road. The road has therefore become redundant and currently serves no function. It's been blocked at either end and over the years has been fragmented by the growth of self-sown trees, which are indicated in these photos. The site is outside the Deepcut settlement boundary and is in the open countryside for policy purposes. It's not within the greenbelt. However, due to the former use of the land and its position between an existing and upcoming residential development, the land has an urbanised character. 3 self-seeded trees would be removed as part of the development, but these have not been objected to by the tree officer, and the removal of the tarmac surface will improve conditions for the retained trees to the rear of the site. No objections have been raised by consultees or neighbours, and the principle of change of use is considered acceptable. The use of a close boarded fence would be appropriate for the private amenity space created, and accordingly, the application is recommended for conditional approval.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Whitcroft, Councillor White.
Thank you. This is in Deepcut again in my ward. Actually, this property is rather unusual insofar as it's one of the last to actually fence off this section of road, and it will be of huge benefit, in my opinion, to the appearance of the area if it actually is acquired and tidied up, because at the moment, as you can see from the illustrations, it's a bit of a mess. This would merely deal with an anomaly which exists. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
I think my question's been answered. I was going to ask, have any of the other neighbours actually done this? And the answer is yes.
Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So we're examining this, and it's come to the committee because the applicant was a planning officer at Surrey Heath. Is there any conflict of interest concerns among any of the officers that are still present? I mean, was she a friend or anything like that?
I believe that I was chosen to be the case officer, so allocated to me as case officer because I've only been with the authority for 6 months, and I never met the applicant.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Point of clarification, really, is at what point is an ex-employee of Surrey Heath not a consideration for a planning application?
Pass.
So it's within 4 years if they've left the authority within 4 years.
Okay, all done? Good. We have an officer recommendation to grant, subject to conditions. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Whitcroft. Seconder, Councillor Whitcroft. All those in favour? We are unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers. It's been an exciting time. I call the meeting closed.